Jake Harrison stood at the main window of Kepler Station and watched the stars dance in the void. The space around him looked empty to most people, but Jake knew better. Out there in the darkness, old machines still moved between the dead worlds, machines that had been killing visitors for thousands of years. This was the Void Sector, a place where no sane alien species dared to build anything permanent. But humans were not like other species, and Jake was proud of that fact. The station hummed quietly around him as his crew went about their daily work. Kepler Station was not much to look at from the outside. It was a simple metal structure built around an old asteroid, with thick armor plating and heavy shields that could stop most weapons. The other races in the galaxy built beautiful stations that looked like art pieces floating in space. Human stations looked like fortresses, and that was exactly what they were meant to be. Lisa Carter walked up behind him, her boots making soft sounds on the metal floor. She was the best communications officer Jake had ever worked with, and she had a gift for hearing things that others missed. Lisa could pull signals out of static that would make alien technicians give up in frustration. Her equipment was a mix of human technology and salvaged alien parts, all held together with determination and spare wire. "Commander, I'm picking up something strange," Lisa said, her voice calm but concerned. She held a data pad in her hands, and Jake could see the worry lines around her green eyes. Lisa had been working the deep space frequencies for 6 hours straight, trying to map the patrol patterns of the ancient Guardian machines that still protected this sector from intruders. Jake turned away from the window and looked at the data pad. The screen showed wave patterns that moved like ocean swells, but these were signals from deep space. Most of them were the usual background noise that filled the void between stars. But there was something else there, something that made Jake's spine feel cold. The patterns were too regular to be natural, too organized to be random. "How long have you been tracking this?" Jake asked, pointing to the strange signals that moved across the screen like a slow heartbeat. Lisa had marked them with red lines, and Jake could see that they were getting stronger over time. Whatever was making these signals was getting closer to their sector of space. "About 3 days now," Lisa replied, brushing a strand of brown hair away from her face. "At first I thought it was just interference from the old defense grid, but the pattern is too complex for that. Look at this part here." She pointed to a section of the display where the signals formed strange geometric shapes. "These aren't random pulses. Someone or something is sending organized transmissions." Jake studied the patterns more carefully. In his 15 years of service in the Void Sector, he had seen many things that defied explanation. Ancient alien technology still functioned in the abandoned worlds around them, sending out signals and warnings that no living being could understand. But this was different. These signals had a purpose behind them, an intelligence that was trying to communicate something important. "Have you tried running them through the translation matrix?" Jake asked. The human military had spent decades collecting alien languages and communication protocols. Their computers could decode most known forms of galactic communication, though the results were not always accurate. Sometimes the translations were so bad that they were more confusing than helpful. Lisa nodded and touched another control on her data pad. "I've tried everything we have, including the new Altarian protocols we got last month. The computer keeps giving me partial matches, but nothing that makes complete sense. The closest it can come is something about movement and consumption, but the context is all wrong." Jake felt a chill run through his body. In the dangerous regions of space where humans lived and worked, the word consumption usually meant something very bad. Pirates consumed cargo ships. War fleets consumed enemy colonies. Ancient weapon systems consumed anything that came too close to the worlds they protected. Nothing good ever consumed anything else in the void between stars. "Send a priority message to Fleet Command," Jake ordered, his voice taking on the hard edge that his crew knew meant serious business. "Include all the signal data and Lisa's analysis. Tell them we think something big is moving through the outer rim, heading towards civilized space." Lisa nodded and began typing commands into her data pad. Jake knew that Fleet Command would take their report seriously. Human commanders had learned to trust the instincts of crews stationed in dangerous sectors. Too many times in the past, early warnings from frontier posts had been the only thing standing between human colonies and complete disaster. But Jake also knew that the other alien species in the Galactic Council would not be as quick to believe their warnings. The beautiful civilized worlds of the inner systems had lived in peace for so long that they had forgotten what real danger looked like. They would debate and discuss and form committees to study the problem. By the time they decided to act, whatever was sending those signals would already be at their doorstep. The communication board beeped softly, and Lisa looked up from her work. "Message sent, Commander. I also copied the data to our backup systems and sent a duplicate to Station Bravo and Station Charlie. If something happens to us, at least the warning will survive." Jake nodded his approval. Lisa was thinking like a true frontier officer, always planning for the worst possible outcome. In the Void sector, paranoia was not a character flaw, it was a survival tool. The crews that lived longest were the ones who assumed that everything was trying to kill them, and planned accordingly. As he walked back toward his office, Jake looked out at the stars one more time. Somewhere out there in the darkness, something was moving toward the light. He could not see it yet, could not fight it or bargain with it or even understand what it wanted. But he could do what humans had always done when faced with the unknown. He could stand watch, send warnings, and prepare for battle. The void was vast and full of dangers that other species refused to face. But humans had made it their home, and they would defend it with everything they had. Whatever was coming toward them from the outer darkness would learn what every other threat in this sector had learned. Humans did not run from fights, especially when they were the only ones willing to have those fights in the first place. The first world to die was beautiful beyond human imagination. Altair Prime had floating cities that moved through clouds of pure silver, and gardens that grew crystal flowers in colors that had no names. The Altarian people had lived there for 10,000 years, building art and music and poetry that made other species weep with joy. Their world had shields that could stop the blast from a dying star, and weapons that could cut through space itself. None of it mattered when the Devourers arrived. Ryan Brooks watched the battle from the bridge of the UNS Defiant, his human destroyer hanging in space 3 light hours away from the dying world. His ship was too far away to help, too small to make a difference, and too slow to reach the battle before it was over. But Ryan watched anyway, because someone needed to witness what was happening. Someone needed to remember how quickly paradise could turn into hell. The enemy ships looked like nothing Ryan had ever seen before. They were not built, they were grown, shaped like massive insects made of black metal and burning energy. Each one was the size of a human city, and they moved through space with the hungry patience of predators. When they reached Altair Prime, they did not attack the cities or the orbital platforms. Instead, they began to eat the planet itself. The Altarian defense fleet was the pride of the inner systems, with ships that gleamed like jewels and moved like dancers through the void. Their weapons could tear holes in reality, and their shields could reflect any known form of attack. Admiral Kethvar, the greatest military mind of his generation, led them into battle with tactics that had never failed before. His ships moved in perfect formation, their weapons firing in harmony like a deadly orchestra. The Devourers learned from every shot that hit them. Their hulls changed and shifted, growing new armor that reflected the Altarian weapons back at their own ships. When the defenders tried energy beams, the enemy absorbed the power and used it to grow larger. When they fired kinetic rounds, the Devourers caught them and turned them into new weapons. Every attack made the enemy stronger, and every victory made them smarter. Ryan activated his ship's recording systems and began transmitting everything back to human space. The other species in the galaxy needed to see this, needed to understand what they were facing. The Devourers were not just another hostile alien race or rogue artificial intelligence. They were something far worse, something that could learn and adapt faster than any defense could be developed. On his tactical display, Ryan watched as the Altarian fleet began to fall apart. Ships that had seemed invincible were being torn apart by their own weapons, turned against them by an enemy that understood their technology better than they did. Admiral Kethvar's perfect formations became scattered groups of desperate survivors, each ship fighting alone as their communications were jammed and their coordination fell apart. But the real horror was happening on the planet below. The Devourers were not conquering Altair Prime, they were consuming it. Their massive ships descended into the atmosphere like hungry whales diving into an ocean of krill. The floating cities fell from the sky, their anti-gravity generators failing as the Devourers fed on their power sources. The crystal gardens withered and died as the machines drained the life force from the soil itself. Ryan's communications officer, a young woman named Beth Palmer, looked up from her console with tears streaming down her face. "Sir, I'm receiving evacuation requests from 17 different refugee ships. They're asking for escort to the inner systems." Her voice cracked as she spoke, and Ryan could see that watching civilized worlds die was harder for some people than others. "Tell them to follow shipping lane 7 back to council space," Ryan ordered, though he knew that most of the evacuation ships would never make it that far. The Devourers were spreading out from Altair Prime like a plague, consuming everything in their path. Refugee ships were slow and defenseless, perfect targets for an enemy that fed on technology and energy. Over the next 6 hours, Ryan watched as 5 more star systems fell to the Devourer advance. Each one had defenses that should have been impossible to overcome, and each one was consumed with the same terrifying efficiency. The crystalline worlds of the Zephyrite shattered like glass when the Devourers turned their own harmonic weapons against them. The gas giant cities of the Titan Collective were drained of their atmospheric energy until they collapsed into frozen balls of ice. The pattern was always the same. The defenders would fight bravely, using their most advanced weapons and their best tactics. The Devourers would learn and adapt, turning each attack against its creators. Within hours, worlds that had stood for millennia would be reduced to lifeless rocks, their technology and energy absorbed into the enemy fleet that grew larger and stronger with every victory. Ryan sent constant updates back to Human Command, but he knew that his reports were being ignored by the alien members of the Galactic Council. When the emergency session was called, he listened to the debates through his ship's communication system and felt his anger growing with every word. The alien leaders were talking about negotiation and peaceful solutions, as if the Devourers could be reasoned with like any other hostile force. Ambassador Helen Price was the only voice of sanity in the chamber, her words cutting through the diplomatic nonsense like a knife through silk. "Council members, we have 17 dead star systems and 40 billion casualties. These are not pirates or rebels we can negotiate with. They are a force of pure consumption that cannot be stopped by treaties or economic sanctions." But the other ambassadors would not listen. The Altarian representative insisted that his people could develop new defensive technologies if given enough time. The Zephyrite delegate claimed that the enemy could be contained within their current territory, using force fields and gravitational barriers. The Titan Collective ambassador suggested that the Devourers might be satisfied with uninhabited systems, leaving the populated worlds alone. Ryan wanted to reach through the communication link and shake them all until they understood what they were facing. He had seen worlds die in a matter of hours, watched as the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy were reduced to refugees and scrap metal. The Devourers were not interested in negotiation or compromise. They wanted everything, and they had the power to take it. As the emergency session dragged on with pointless debates and worthless resolutions, Ryan received new orders from Human Command. All human ships were to fall back to defensive positions around Earth and the other human colonies. They were abandoning the frontier just like everyone else, leaving the outer systems to their fate. But Ryan knew that retreat would not save them. The Devourers would consume the frontier worlds, learn from their technology, and grow stronger. When they finally reached the inner systems, they would be unstoppable. The only chance was to fight them now, while they were still learning, still adapting to galactic technology. Ryan made a decision that would have gotten him court-martialed in peacetime. Instead of retreating, he ordered his ship deeper into enemy territory. If the other species would not fight for their own worlds, maybe they would listen when they saw humans willing to die for them. Dr. Kevin Park sat in his laboratory aboard the research vessel UNS Discovery, surrounded by screens showing alien psychology profiles and tactical analysis reports. As the galaxy's leading expert on xenopsychology, Kevin had spent his career studying how different species thought and fought. Now he was trying to understand something that might not think like a living being at all. The Devourers had been studying human tactics for 2 weeks, ever since Admiral Nelson had started broadcasting detailed battle reports across all communication channels. Kevin's job was to figure out how an artificial intelligence would process that information and whether humans could use the enemy's learning systems against them. The answer he found was both encouraging and terrifying. The Devourers aren't just adaptive, Kevin explained to the assembled fleet commanders during a secure video conference. They're trying to become us. Every time they encounter a new species, they absorb not just the technology but the entire way of thinking. They've already integrated Altarian logical patterns, Zephyrite harmonic mathematics, and Titan collective gas flow dynamics. Commander Susan Hayes leaned forward in her chair, her weathered face showing the strain of commanding a mixed fleet of human and alien volunteers. Doctor, what does that mean for our chances of beating them? Kevin pulled up a new display showing brain scan comparisons between different species. It means that the Devourers are trying to predict human behavior using algorithms based on other species. But human thought patterns are fundamentally different from any other known intelligence. We make decisions that seem completely random to logical minds, but actually follow emotional and intuitive patterns that can't be programmed. The proof of Kevin's theory came at the Battle of Iron Gate. The massive space station hung in the center of a nebula that pulsed with dangerous radiation, its structure built around the twisted remains of 3 dead planets. Commander Bobby Chen had turned the station into a maze of defensive positions that used the nebula's natural hazards as weapons. The radiation storms could fry enemy electronics, while gravitational anomalies could tear ships apart without warning. When the Devourer fleet arrived, they came prepared for the human tactics they had studied. Their ships had been modified to counter the strategies used at New Denver and other battles, with new armor configurations and weapon systems designed specifically to fight humans. But they were not prepared for what they found at Iron Gate. Bobby Chen did not follow any of the tactical patterns that the Devourers had learned to expect. Instead of defending his strongest positions, he abandoned them and fell back to areas that seemed strategically worthless. Instead of using his best weapons first, he held them in reserve and fought with improvised devices that barely functioned. His decisions seemed so illogical that even his own officers questioned their sanity. But there was a method to Bobby's madness that no computer could understand. He was using the nebula itself as his primary weapon, timing his retreats and advances to coincide with radiation storms that would disable enemy systems. When gravitational waves swept through the area, he positioned his forces so that the Devourers would be caught in the worst effects while humans rode the waves like surfers on an ocean. The battle turned into a deadly game of 3-dimensional chess played in an environment that changed the rules every few minutes. The Devourers tried to adapt to each new tactic, but by the time they understood what Bobby was doing, he had already moved on to something completely different. Their analytical systems became overloaded, trying to process behavioral patterns that contradicted everything they had learned about military logic. Susan Hayes watched the battle from her command ship at the edge of the nebula, coordinating the efforts of volunteers from 6 different species who had come to learn human fighting methods. The learning process was painful and expensive, as alien commanders struggled to understand tactics that seemed to violate every principle of sound military strategy. Captain Zeth Kor of the Altarian cruiser Harmony was the first to break, his logical mind unable to accept orders that appeared suicidal. Commander Hayes, you are asking me to attack the strongest enemy position while ignoring targets that could be easily destroyed. This goes against every tactical principle my people have developed over 10,000 years of warfare. Susan's response was direct and uncompromising. Captain, your people's tactical principles got 17 worlds destroyed in 2 weeks. If you want to learn how to beat these things, you need to stop thinking like an Altarian and start thinking like a human. The alien volunteers who stayed began to see results when they started following human tactical doctrines, despite their instincts telling them it was wrong. Lieutenant Commander Vorth 9 of the Titan Collective learned to use his gas-handling expertise in ways that his species had never imagined, creating atmospheric weapons that were as unpredictable as they were deadly. Captain Crystal Song of the Zephyrite discovered that her people's harmonic abilities could be used to create sonic chaos rather than organized melodies, but the real breakthrough came when Dr. Kevin Park developed what became known as the Crucible strategy. Instead of fighting the Devourers in normal space where their technological advantages were strongest, humans would draw them into the most dangerous regions of the galaxy, places where environmental hazards were so severe that advanced technology became a liability rather than an asset. The Devourers are optimized for efficiency and logical decision-making, Kevin explained in his strategic analysis report. But the most dangerous parts of space don't follow logical rules. Black hole ergospheres, quantum storm systems, areas where space-time itself is unstable. These are places where intuition and adaptability matter more than computational power. The first test of the Crucible strategy took place in the Shattered Worlds, a region where an ancient superweapon had torn holes in reality itself. Space in that area behaved in ways that violated basic physics, with time flowing backward in some zones and gravity working sideways in others. Most species avoided the region entirely, but humans had built research stations there to study the anomalies. When the Devourer fleet followed human forces into the Shattered Worlds, they found themselves in an environment where their technological superiority meant nothing. Their adaptive systems could not learn to counter effects that changed randomly every few seconds. Ships that had been invincible in normal space were destroyed by temporal paradoxes and gravitational inversions that no computer could predict or prevent. Kevin Park watched the battle from a safe distance, taking notes on how the Devourers reacted to chaotic environments. "They're trying to find patterns where none exist," he observed. "Their learning algorithms are getting caught in recursive loops, trying to analyze phenomena that can't be analyzed." The victory at the Shattered Worlds proved that the Crucible strategy could work, but it also showed how dangerous it was for everyone involved. 3 human ships were lost to the same anomalies that destroyed the Devourer fleet, and 2 alien volunteer vessels had to be abandoned when their crews were driven insane by exposure to backwards time streams. But word of the victory spread throughout the galaxy, carried by the few alien survivors who had witnessed humans fighting in conditions that would have killed any other species. For the first time since the war began, the Galactic Council started to pay attention to human tactical reports. Maybe the crazy humans from the dangerous sectors actually knew something about fighting impossible enemies. Susan Hayes received her first official communication from the Galactic High Command 3 days after the Battle of the Shattered Worlds. They were requesting detailed tactical manuals and offering to place additional alien volunteers under human command. The tide was starting to turn, but Kevin Park knew that the hardest battles were still ahead. The Devourers were learning from their defeats just as they had learned from their victories. Next time, they would be prepared for human unpredictability and environmental warfare. The final confrontation would require something even more desperate than the Crucible strategy, something that would push human adaptability to its absolute limits. The Maelstrom was a place that existed on no official star charts because no sane being would ever want to go there. It was a region of space where reality itself was breaking down, where the collapse of an ancient star cluster had torn holes in the fabric of space-time that led nowhere and everywhere at once. Dark matter flowed through the area like invisible rivers, and temporal distortions meant that past and future existed side by side in impossible ways. Admiral Chris Nelson stood on the bridge of the UNS Resilience as his fleet approached the edge of the Maelstrom, knowing that he was leading his people into a place where they might never return. But intelligence reports had confirmed what they all feared. The Devourers had built their primary production facilities in the heart of the Maelstrom, using the chaotic environment to hide their operations from detection. If humanity was going to win this war, they would have to fight the final battle in the most dangerous place in the galaxy. "Admiral, we're receiving distress signals from the alien evacuation fleets," reported Lieutenant Danny Walsh, his voice tight with concern. "The Titan collective ships are breaking apart from gravitational stress, and the Altarian vessels are losing power as their systems shut down in self-protection mode." Chris nodded grimly as he watched the alien ships falling behind on his tactical display. The beautiful vessels that had once ruled the galaxy were not built to handle environments like the Maelstrom. Their advanced technology and elegant designs became liabilities when faced with conditions that changed faster than their computers could adapt. Only human ships, with their crude but robust construction, could survive in such chaos. Captain Laura Kim piloted the experimental stealth ship UNS Ghost through fields of dark matter that would have torn apart more sophisticated vessels. Her ship was a masterpiece of human engineering, built not for beauty or efficiency but for pure survival. Every system had multiple backups. Every component was designed to function even when everything around it was failing. And every decision Laura made was based on intuition rather than computer analysis. "Ghost to resilience," Laura's voice crackled over the communication system, distorted by the temporal anomalies around them. "I'm reading massive energy signatures dead ahead. The Devourers have built something big in the center of this mess, something that's drawing power from the collapsing stars themselves." Alex Stone worked frantically at his computer station, his fingers flying over keyboards as he put the finishing touches on the most important program of his life. The virus he had created was unlike anything that had ever been written before, designed not to destroy the Devourer network, but to infect it with something far more dangerous than any weapon. The virus contained pure human irrationality, random decision patterns and emotional responses that no logical system could process or understand. "The virus is ready," Alex announced, his voice barely audible over the sound of the ship's hull groaning under gravitational stress. "But I need to plant it directly into their central network hub. No remote transmission is going to work in this environment." Chris looked at the tactical display showing the heart of the maelstrom, where the Devourer production facility hung like a dark spider in a web of twisted space-time. The facility was protected by defensive systems that had learned from every human tactic, every strategy that had worked in previous battles. But it was also located in an environment so chaotic that those same defensive systems could barely function. "All ships, this is Admiral Nelson," Chris broadcast to his fleet over the emergency channel. "We're going in. Stay close to the Resilience and follow our lead. Don't trust your instruments, don't trust your computers, and don't trust anything that looks safe. Trust your instincts and trust each other." The final assault began as the human fleet plunged deeper into the maelstrom, their ships buffeted by forces that existed outside normal physics. The few remaining alien volunteers watched in amazement as human vessels rode gravitational waves like ancient sailing ships riding ocean swells. Where alien technology failed, human adaptability thrived. The Devourers were waiting for them, their production facility defended by weapon systems that had been optimized to counter every known form of attack. But they were not prepared for humans who fought like madmen in an environment that drove computers insane. Chris Nelson led his ships in attack patterns that made no sense, using the chaotic nature of the maelstrom as both weapon and shield. Laura Kim guided the Ghost through defenses that should have been impenetrable, her ship invisible to sensors that could not function properly in the twisted space around them. She flew by pure instinct, making split-second decisions that saved her life a dozen times over. When her computer systems began to fail, she shut them off and flew manually, trusting her human reflexes over any mechanical assistance. "I'm at the hub," Laura reported as her ship docked with the central core of the Devourer facility. Beginning upload of the virus now, she connected Alex's program to the enemy network, watching as the infection spread through systems that had conquered half the galaxy. The virus worked exactly as Alex had designed it to work. Instead of trying to destroy the Devourer network, it introduced elements of human thought patterns into their logical systems. Suddenly, the machines that had operated with perfect efficiency began to make decisions based on emotion and intuition. They started to doubt their own calculations, to second-guess their strategies, to act in ways that contradicted their programming. The effect spread throughout the Devourer fleet like a plague of confusion. Ships that had moved in perfect coordination began to attack each other as their command systems gave contradictory orders. Production facilities that had operated for thousands of years ground to a halt as their controlling intelligences became paralyzed by uncertainty. The machines that had consumed worlds were being destroyed by the one thing they could not process or understand: the chaotic beauty of human consciousness. But the victory came at a terrible price. The maelstrom itself was breaking apart under the stress of the battle, its gravitational anomalies becoming even more unstable as massive amounts of energy were released. Laura Kim's ship was caught in a temporal distortion that aged her 50 years and 50 seconds, and Alex Stone's consciousness was temporarily scattered across multiple timelines before the ship's systems pulled him back together. Chris Nelson watched as the Devourer facility collapsed into itself, creating a black hole that swallowed the remains of the enemy fleet. The threat that had consumed 17 worlds and killed billions of beings was finally gone, defeated not by superior technology or firepower, but by the simple human ability to think in ways that made no logical sense. The surviving human ships limped back toward civilized space, carrying news of the victory to a galaxy that had given up hope. Ambassador Helen Price stood before the Galactic Council once again, but this time she was not asking for permission to fight. She was announcing the creation of the Frontier Guard, a joint military force dedicated to protecting the dangerous edges of known space. "The galaxy has learned an important lesson," Helen told the assembled delegates, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen worlds die and civilizations fall. There are threats out there that cannot be defeated by logic or technology or diplomatic negotiation. Sometimes, the only way to win is to be willing to fight in places where others fear to tread. The alien species that had once dismissed humans as primitive and reckless now competed to have their best officers serve under human command. They had learned that in a universe full of impossible dangers, the species that thrived in impossible places were the ones you wanted on your side when everything went wrong. Chris Nelson retired from active duty and became the first director of frontier operations, overseeing human settlements in the most dangerous regions of space. He often stood at the observation windows of his new headquarters and looked out at the stars, remembering the battles they had fought and the friends they had lost. The galaxy was safer now because humans had been willing to stand guard in the darkness, fighting battles that others could not or would not fight. And in the deepest reaches of unexplored space, new human colonies were being built in regions that other species considered uninhabitable. They were staffed by volunteers who understood that someone had to watch the void. Someone had to stand ready when the next impossible threat emerged from the darkness between stars. They were the guardians of the galactic frontier, and they would fight where no one else would until the end of time itself. Admiral Chris Nelson stood in the command center of the UNS Resilience and watched as the galaxy burned around him. On the main display, red markers showed the advance of the Devourer fleet as it swept through system after system, like a forest fire consuming dry wood. Each red marker had once been a populated world with billions of living beings, now reduced to empty rocks floating in the void. The retreat had turned into a stampede. Alien evacuation fleets streamed past human positions without stopping, their ships packed with refugees who had lost everything except their lives. The beautiful civilizations that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years were running away from their own territories, leaving behind worlds and colonies that they claimed to love more than life itself. But Chris Nelson was not running. Standing beside him on the bridge were the captains of 47 human warships, men and women who had volunteered to stay and fight when everyone else had chosen to flee. They were not the biggest fleet in the galaxy, or the most advanced, but they were the only ones willing to stand between the Devourers and the innocent worlds beyond. "Admiral, incoming message from Fleet Command on Earth," said his communications officer, Lieutenant Danny Walsh. The young man looked tired after 3 days of constant battle alerts, but his voice remained steady. "They're ordering all human forces to fall back to the Sol defense perimeter immediately." Chris looked at the message on his personal display and then deleted it without reading past the first line. He had already made his choice, and no order from Earth was going to change his mind. The human colonies on the frontier were his responsibility, and he would not abandon them the way the alien governments had abandoned their own people. "Send a reply to Fleet Command," Chris said, his voice carrying clearly through the bridge. "Tell them that the Frontier Fleet will maintain current positions and engage the enemy as ordered." He paused for a moment, then added, "Tell them we'll hold the line until relief arrives or until there's no line left to hold." The first test came at New Denver, a mining colony built inside a cluster of asteroids that were rich in rare metals. The colony was not important enough to appear on most galactic maps, but it was home to 30,000 humans who had chosen to build their lives in the darkness between stars. Colonel Amy Watson commanded the ground defenses, while her husband, Captain Tony Watson, controlled the orbital weapons platforms. When the Devourer scout ships arrived, they expected to find another defenseless world that would surrender or die without a fight. Instead, they found humans who had turned every asteroid into a fortress, every mining tunnel into a weapons emplacement, and every piece of equipment into something that could kill invaders. The mining charges that the colonists used to blast apart asteroids made excellent improvised bombs when attached to small ships and aimed at enemy hulls. Amy Watson had learned her tactics fighting pirates in the Outer Rim, where official help was always too far away and too slow to arrive. She knew that humans could not match alien technology or firepower, but they could be more unpredictable than any computer system could handle. When the Devourer ground forces landed on the main asteroid, they found traps and ambushes that followed no logical pattern. The enemy machines were designed to learn from their encounters, to analyze human tactics and develop counters for every strategy. But humans did not follow strategies that made sense to alien minds or artificial intelligences. Amy's defenders would retreat from strong positions and attack from weak ones, would sacrifice valuable equipment to save worthless ground. would fight desperately for objectives that had no military value. Tony Watson coordinated the space battle from his command center deep inside the largest asteroid. His weapons platforms were old and underpowered compared to alien military technology, but they were tough and reliable like everything else humans built. When the Devourers adapted to his missile attacks, he switched to kinetic rounds. When they learned to avoid his energy weapons, he started ramming their ships with unmanned freight haulers loaded with explosives. The battle lasted 18 hours, and when it was over, New Denver was still in human hands. The Devourer attack force had been destroyed, their ships reduced to scrap metal floating between the asteroids. But the victory came at a terrible cost. Half of the orbital platforms were gone, and nearly 1,000 colonists had died defending their homes. Chris Nelson arrived at New Denver 6 hours after the battle ended, his fleet moving through the wreckage of enemy ships like ghosts walking through a graveyard. He found Amy Watson in the colony's medical center, her left arm in a sling and her face covered with cuts from flying debris. She looked up when he entered the room, and Chris saw something in her eyes that he had never seen in the eyes of alien commanders. "Admiral, we held them," Amy said, her voice hoarse from breathing smoke and dust during the battle. "They threw everything they had at us and we held them." She paused, then added, "But they learned from the fight. Next time they come back, they'll be ready for our tactics." Chris nodded, understanding the problem that Amy had identified. The Devourers' greatest strength was their ability to adapt and learn from every encounter. They would study the recordings of this battle, analyze every human tactic, and develop new strategies to counter them. The next attack would be harder to win, and the one after that might be impossible. But Chris had also learned something important from the Battle of New Denver. The Devourers' adaptive systems worked best against logical, predictable enemies. They could learn to counter alien military doctrines because those doctrines followed patterns that made sense to analytical minds. Human tactics were different, based on intuition and creativity rather than logic and efficiency. "Colonel, I want you to write a complete report on everything that happened here," Chris said, pulling up a chair beside Amy's bed. "Every tactic you used, every mistake you made, every crazy idea that worked. We're going to share it with every human commander in the fleet." Amy looked puzzled. "Sir, if we share our tactics, won't the enemy learn about them too? Their intelligence systems are probably monitoring our communications." Chris smiled, and for the first time in days, it was a real smile rather than the grim expression he had been wearing since the war began. "Colonel, that's exactly what I'm hoping for. If the Devourers want to learn human tactics, I'm going to give them more than they can handle." Over the next week, Chris put his plan into action. Every human commander received copies of Amy's report, along with tactical manuals from dozens of other battles. But Chris also made sure that the information was transmitted using communication methods that the Devourers could intercept and decode. He wanted the enemy to study human tactics, to fill their analytical systems with data about how humans fought. The trap was set at Iron Gate Station, a massive fortress that humans had built inside an unstable nebula. The nebula was filled with radiation storms and gravitational anomalies that made normal space travel impossible. But humans had learned to use those dangers as weapons. When the next Devourer fleet arrived, they would find enemies who fought in ways that no logical system could predict or counter. Chris looked out at the swirling clouds of the nebula and smiled again. The galaxy's other species had retreated to their safe worlds and comfortable homes, leaving the dangerous frontier to be defended by the only people crazy enough to call it home. The Devourers were about to learn why humans had survived in places where no other species could live.